Per usual, living on this channel is for educational purposes only and is not intended as financial advice. Let's take a look at some charts for Setup Sunday. Bitcoin holding flat for a week now. Alt's doing quite well on a relative basis. ETH certainly leading the pack. ETH ecosystem certainly leading the pack. We'll start with ETF Flows, which picked up once again a little bit. Look, if we can have 250 to 500 million in inflows a day, that's fine. Okay, more is better, obviously, but at this early stage in the game, love it. One interesting thought that I had this week is between the ultra long-term time horizon people and the speculative short-term people, there's kind of this yin and yang where nobody maybe wants to move first. It's one of the reasons why we're sort of hanging out at 52, 51. Maybe if the speculative mania on NVIDIA, for example, calms down a little bit, we will see some of that on the Bitcoin side. Again, it's kind of like alts relative to Bitcoin, right? Like Bitcoin thrives when there's general bullishness in legacy. But if there's too much bullishness in legacy, it sort of pulls all the speculators to legacy. Not that they're the same crowd necessarily. But my point is, if we don't have speculative money to push us slightly higher, then we probably don't see as much longer term capital feeling the need to FOMO, for the lack of a better word. They can take their time. I'd imagine if and when we're above 52.5, for example, you're probably going to see flows pick up quite a bit. So all in all, flows fine here. Something to watch for this week, and we sort of saw a piece of that on the 21st, is an uptick in GBTC outflows because they still have Genesis Gemini Earn payments to make. They're doing that via GBTC sales. It's all detailed here in the Gemini Earn page. I don't know whether or not DCG putting resistance on the New York AG's investigation regarding Genesis, whether or not that delays the Genesis sales, I don't know. At this point, I just don't want to think about it anymore because I don't care. It's going to happen, but I don't think there's a certain timetable or expectation or handoff of the money between Genesis and Gemini Earn. I don't think that's detailed anywhere here, but it's getting closer to being completed, hopefully. One last thing about the flows, if you're curious where I get all this information, it's on this Farside website. I'll put the link in the description of this video. I update that spreadsheet usually by midnight EST every day. I'm F5ing this website around 11:45. That's basically when all the flows come in. But in case you want to do that yourself, you can find it on that website. There's been a lot of questions about Bitcoin exchange balances and custody and Coinbase. So let me take 5 seconds to talk about that. Coinbase has around 200 billion assets under management. You're not going to see it on something like DeFi Llama because it's not completely transparent what those addresses are. We just know it's 200 billion from the Coinbase earnings statements. Gemini also not on this list. But when you look at all these exchanges, there's really no competition between Coinbase. Even Binance arguably doesn't have anywhere close to 92 billion. And then after Binance, there's clearly a third tier of exchange. And then there's a tier 4, tier 0, tier don't go here exchange, right? Robinhood, I think, surprises people that they have this much crypto. It certainly surprised me. I'll talk about Hood a little bit towards the end as well. But the one thing you got to be careful of with flows, whenever you see a tweet or somebody talking about flows on exchanges, it's hard to trust the data because you don't know what the data is actually looking at. Are they including custody? Are they including institutional? Blah, 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 right? Here's CryptoQuant, one example of this, showing about 2 million BTC, okay, in reserves. Not all that is on the book, on the order book at any given time. So it's not necessarily for sale, but it's on an exchange. I'm glad that post FTX, we've seen people pull BTC from exchanges, but I suspect this actually isn't people pulling BTC from exchanges. This is probably BTC moving into some sort of custodial service or OTC service. Regardless, we're not seeing a rise in BTC on exchanges, which some people would think is bullish. I'm not going to disagree with that. It's just hard to really know what's going on here, is the argument I'm making. One of the natural sellers to pay attention to that we probably have a better handle on is the miner data. Miners reserves have also dropped off considerably. So they have been selling as well, which I'd rather see. I'd rather them not hold on to everything through a bear market and then sell at the bottom, which is what they love to do. So this I actually like. I actually like seeing this a lot. If we're rising with if price is rising with minor selling, I mean, is there even more bullish thing than that? And this is probably partly why we are just flat at 52. There's clearly a perpetual bid based on ETF flows, but to some degree, there's an equilibrium on who's selling, who's buying, right? Yes, there's X BTC per day, but miners have been holding on to a lot of that and have been selling more of it recently. So it certainly helps to know where that's coming from. If you look at other websites, they're going to have different numbers for BTC balances and exchanges. This is CoinGlass, which I love, but I don't know who to trust, right? This is at 1.4. It's down since the ETFs got approved. You know, to me, at this point, I hate to say this because I'm going to create a few enemies, but on-chain analysis is kind of like junk mail, where it's like, you know, you open it, you're kind of interested, but then you just toss it aside. It's like, yes, it's an interesting little tidbit. I can't use this. This isn't actionable to me. Okay. I love to see where this is going, but it's hard to know what that even means, because what custody are we looking at? What exchanges are we looking at? ETH, very much the same. Hard to see on the graph, but ETH falling off the table on exchange balances. Does this include staking, right? Does this include XYZ? Who knows what? Just something to think about. If we look at the Bitcoin balances last halving, pre-post bull run, the all-time high is somewhere around 3.1 million BTC on exchanges. That was the COVID bottom when there was a bunch of panic selling. So most coins are 10 minutes away, realistically, right? Maybe 30, depending on the exchange. So I wouldn't hang your head on this saying, oh, you know, XYZ balance on X exchange. Okay, sure. Generally, if price goes down, we tend to see deposits to exchanges. If there's some sort of minor incident, we see deposits towards exchanges. If exchanges are blowing up, we tend to see people taking money off of exchanges. Okay, it's not really exactly actionable in my eyes. If we look at flows, this is from Coinmetrics, flows on a weekly average relative to price, we still haven't seen, I would argue, that many inflows to exchanges. So as many people have said, holders are still holding, right? I mean, that's the bottom line here. Let's say we believe the data. We're certainly not seeing a bunch of people say, all right, here's my number, guys. My number was 50K. I'm sending it to the exchange. I'm selling. You know, we're certainly not seeing that yet. Once again, you can see COVID spike, bunch of BTC to exchanges, FTX exploding, Celsius 3AC, right? A bunch of BTC panic. And then at the very top, usually you see a ton of BTC sent to exchanges. I think this was actually Roger Ver capitulating. I could be wrong there, but we're not seeing that yet, right? And we can look at realized cap as well, which is the last time coins have moved. And then based on the age of those coins, we can see kind of like a rock formation fossil record, right? We can see when we have a lot of fresh activity versus a lot of hodl activity, we still, I would argue, have considerable hodl sentiment based on coin movements. And we can look again relative to having periods where we're about in line with what you'd expect. So we're not seeing a bunch of people say, this is my number, let me sell here. I don't think that realistically happens until 6 figures. You know, I think that's when we start to see people send Bitcoin to exchanges in a big way. It's going to start to pick up more at all-time highs, and anything past all-time highs, very similar to 2017. But we're not seeing that yet. We're seeing an uptick, but nowhere near the previous peaks. So we're good there. As far as seasonality is concerned, we've had a really good Q1 so far. Half of me thinks, like, you know, historically seasonality, Q2, Q4 matter. We shouldn't be having great Q1s. Is it different this time? Probably not. You know, is Q2 going to be good? Probably. Is March going to be good? I think is the question to ask, right? I don't really care too much about the quarterly stuff at the moment, but March historically has not been good. The past 3 years, March has been great. So I don't know if we've, you know, flipped the poles here on seasonality. I don't know what's going on, but in terms of trying to make heads or tails of what's going to happen based on seasonality, I think it's hard to say. The streak has been green for the past 3 years in March, which is unusual. September's another one to watch for. I know this is months away, but wake me up when September ends is a thing, because historically September is just downright awful, just not good. Okay. And that leads to Q4 being great historically, October being great, Thanksgiving being amazing, right? April is usually great because March is usually not great, So we'll see what happens in March. We have BTFP ending. We have reverse repo potentially getting drained to zero. That's some legacy stuff. It's going to be happening in March, most likely. Some volatility events, let's say. And if we look at ETH here, ETH generally does better in the first half of the year. So to me, this kind of makes sense that up until the ETFs are likely to get approved in May, ETH will do probably better than most coins. And then it usually cools off in the second half of the year. That's why it was so unusual that January was as flat as it was, because ETH's time is the first half of the year. So far, so good on that front. As far as funding, and trading's like driving, right? If you're driving 2 hours to grandma's house or whatever, you check the traffic. Google will tell you if there's construction. Then as you're driving, you're taking the highway or you're taking side streets. Was there an accident? Just sort of checking our blind spots here. Funding is hot-ish. It's certainly hotter on the coins lower down the market cap. It's not insane. It's not, this can't go higher. It's not, this is going to reverse here. But, looking at Solana, for instance, yeah, funding's pretty high. If we look at the heat map, funding for most of this stuff is pretty high. Most of the heavy altcoins, right? on the alty side of the spectrum, funding's quite high. As long as price is moving up, it's fine. But if price starts to stall, you tend to see people getting antsy, closing positions, price goes lower, and then it's this sort of waterfall in slow motion eventually until funding comes down a little bit. But this across the board, funding's quite hot. Not like, dangerous, Cheeto, cheesy, taquito, whatever level spicy, but it's hot. Looking at aggregated Bitcoin OI, it's elevated. I don't think it's crazy. Again, I see people talking about this. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think this goes higher easily. I don't think it's like, oh, we have to reverse because OI is X, right? If we include CME, OI is near all-time highs, very close to all-time highs. I'm not concerned at all. If we look at the CME futures open interest, it is well past all-time highs, which makes sense. We have more institutional interest in Bitcoin. You're going to see OI continue to rise. Aggregated funding for Bitcoin on the higher end, getting higher, has been higher lately. But, if we're stalling out here and I see funding this high, it's not exactly a warm and fuzzy hug to get into that long, right? Because you're going to immediately be eating quite a lot of funding. Now, when we're cooking, right, like we were post-halving in 2020 and 2021, funding can go and have a rip roar in old time, right? And it's not that big of a deal because everybody's all bulled up. And for the most part, we're going in one direction. But I don't think we're quite there yet on the Bitcoin side. ETH, OI, SANS, CME also at all-time highs. Maybe a little concerning for ETH, but again, I don't think this is like, oh, we have to reverse, right? Because of XYZ open interest. If we look at the ETH open interest, including CME, it's very close to all-time high. And ETH CME open interest, not quite to all-time highs yet. I'm just highlighting this because it's, crypto natives versus non-crypto people, basically, who'd be trading CME. ETH aggregated open interest is rising. It's elevated. You're not having a good time if you are not seeing prices go higher, right? Now, again, dialing this back to 2020 and 2021, funding can go much higher if price is moving. If anything, price was moving slower then with funding much higher. So that would tell me, hey, we're actually totally fine here, right? We can get a lot hotter on funding. Just something to consider when, Bitcoin's flat and ETH is just straight up. Okay, let's take a look at some other stuff here to see what the heck's going on. As far as the high time frame Bitcoin picture, we are still in power law corridor territory. We look great, unbothered, moisturized, in our lane. As far as the angle of attack going into halving, I don't think it's anything crazy. I don't think people were talking about a left translated cycle when the plus token Ponzi was going on, for example. Have we seen some speculative fervor relative to the ETFs? Sure. Are we going to pull that forward a little bit? Sure. If anything, 2020 and 2021 kind of pooped out there. and didn't quite get to expectations. And, you can argue, well, there's diminishing returns on the next halving. Sure, but we've also never had ETFs. Okay, so that's why I think it's different this time. But this looks phenomenal. No complaints there. The near-term pitchfork, we are peaking above, which is curious because we tend to do one of two things when this happens. This either says we are extremely overbought and we are going to get pulled back into the gravity of this midpoint, which is probably more likely than what I'm about to say, which is just complete send, absolutely parabolic to all-time highs, right? It's probably like 60-40 and what goes on here. There's a path where we break 52.5. We bring in some speculative money. We bring in some institutional FOMO and it's game over, right? That's all-time highs, easy. We have to get there first. So I think if this then that, like I always say, it's a decision tree. If I had to take a trade here, it would probably be hedged flat. I don't have a leveraged position on. I'm in full coin, but I don't know how soon we move up, right? I'm not like, oh, time to hold cash here. No, this is full coin territory all the way. Even if we go back to 42, I'm not really concerned. Weekly cloud looks great. This will twist in the next 2 weeks, green, which will be the first bullish Kumo twist since 2023 when we twisted bearish. I mean, this is exactly what you want to see. We are super early on the cloud, certainly relative to halving. It would make sense that if we break 52.5 and we go to 65 or something into halving, maybe we have a little bit of a post-halving relaxation with price. And hey, maybe we come back to 50. I don't know. But this is a very, very bullish picture on the cloud. Daily cloud remains very, very bullish. The default answer to I'm sitting in cash, what should I do? Not financial advice, but the cloud would tell you bids on the Tenkin, bids on the Kijun, and then I just tell people, look, just DCA, right? Because there's a world where you just don't get a chance to get in. That's a possibility. But if you're trying to account for all possibilities, 25% DCA, 25% Tenkin and the blue line, 50% on the Kijun, that way you're happy no matter what happens. You can see previously, we kind of just stalled out after a big move from 28 to 34 and just sat there for like 2 weeks and then moved up a little bit and then sat there again for like 2 weeks. And then we went up, right? So as bullish as this is, we've doubled since October, like all that's been great. It hasn't been a great trading environment per se where we're, it hasn't been 43 to 50, right? That was phenomenal. That was quick. If you're in a leverage trade, amazing. If you're in a leverage trade here, it's a lot of patience, right? You could argue we're overbought based on the Tenkin, based on the Kijun. Sure. I mean, it'll eventually catch up with us. I don't think it's that big of a deal, personally. There's a chart pattern, whether or not this is a megaphone and or ascending right angled triangle, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But the stop loss on this would be any lower low. So what you don't want to see is anything below 50. I think that's pretty common sense at this point. 52.5 is not only a higher high, but it is the yearly pivot. This pattern, if you want to call it a pattern, measures to 60, right? So there is a world and a path where we get there. We just have to see some strength at 52.5, and then we can talk. We've been here for a week doing kind of nothing, which isn't bearish outright, but it's hard to say, yeah, 60 is on the table. The moment we break 52.5, I am very confident we will try to reach for 60. That to me is a leverage long trade. Sitting here in a leverage long doesn't really make sense to me. I think it's kind of a coin flip here, even though it leans bullish, but just get me across that line in the sand and the yearly pivot, and then we can talk. By the way, there was another yearly pivot all the way back here. For those who remember, there was an ascending triangle, a little bit more of a bullish lean to it, but it took us a long time to break that yearly pivot at like 37K. So there's no rush, but the actionability here is definitely above 52.5. I think the people who are probably getting antsy are the late longers who are maybe long from like 48, 49, watching us go from 42 to 48, thinking, okay, right, let's get this show on the road, right? And the last thing you want is a move down to below 50 and then send it, or a move above 52.5 and then and then take it all lower. I can't really think about that stuff, so I'm not in that camp. But if we do break 50, I do like the daily Kijun, which is this red line at 46 something, whatever it is, 45.8. So it's a whole lot of wait and see up here. Now, if I want to look for bold things, if I want to get all bulled up, which I am, full bull, okay, I could say, well, this probably looks like some sort of flag on the 8-hour. It certainly fits that fractal pattern. But again, it's if this, then that. We need to see this break out. First, we need to see it break the diagonal and then the yearly pivot. But if it breaks the diagonal, it should have no problem breaking out. If this fails, if we get a lower low for whatever reason, we're back to daily Kijun conversation. This probably is also an actionable short trade. This was certainly an actionable long entry signal with a bullish cloud. This is a dangerous but potential trade to take. Dangerous because it's hard to be bearish when everything is bullish. But this would help the bull case. That'd be the best outcome, is the flag continuation, which also measures to about 60K. Looking at ETH, not too much to say. These weekly candles have been super strong. There's this chart pattern or candlestick pattern called 3 white soldiers, where you just see 3 heavy-bodied candlesticks, kind of similar to July, actually, 2021. I'm just picking stuff out. There are times where we don't have continuation, right? So this was 2022, right? Strength over weakness makes sense here based on ETF speculation for ETH. I have no problem with it. We're above the weekly cloud, no issues. 3,200 is the yearly pivot. Daily cloud, it's been lights out since the bullish TK recross with price above cloud. As bearish as I was here because we weren't going anywhere, because we were doing nothing on ETH, setting up for a head and shoulders, the cloud was right. The cloud usually is right. The cloud says, you make higher highs, expect higher highs. That's what the cloud is saying. And this is just continuous evidence, again, for be proud of the cloud, trust the cloud. It makes sense. Take the trade. Okay. take the trade on the daily. That was a great trade. Similar to Bitcoin, it's got this right angled something. This measures to between the next yearly pivots, so 33 to 3,600. If you're long here, the 12-hour fractals, just one time frame below the daily, would stop you out at 2,900. So based on this, it's still telling you to stay in this thing, which is tough because we're just up so much so quick, But if this is all ETH strength on a relative basis plus ETF stuff, sure, it's just gotta start moving with funding the way it is. One setup for ETH BTC relative to the ETFs, which I had said, this is going lower, it's not going to hold. So far it has. I had said BTC flows are going to trump ETH ETF speculation, which so far hasn't really been true. It could be true in the next couple of weeks. But if I think of how this trade could go against you or against everybody who's long ETH, if the SEC comes out randomly and just says they're all denied, that would be hilarious, first of all. I don't think it's going to happen. I think ETH gets an ETF. They have a futures product. It's hard to not approve an ETH ETF based on that criteria. Do I think ETH is a security? Absolutely. But that ship has kind of sailed at this point. The other reason that we probably get an ETH ETF is because of BlackRock. So maybe a date to watch is March 10th if they decide to approve all of these early, which I doubt. It would be very interesting if BlackRock comes out and says we're going to do staking on Coinbase. That's a headline to watch for. That would probably suggest their increased confidence in getting this approved. It's just unlikely that the SEC denies BlackRock. Now, if BlackRock pulls out, that's another headline to watch for. That's a sign that they're all getting denied. Okay, so a lot of different news catalysts could happen here. Market clearly has an answer. They think they have an answer with price going higher. From a trading perspective, technicals would suggest maybe this was a diamond bottom. 0.75 or something would be the target. 0.71 is the pivot. So I think this is where the ETH strength is coming from, and it helps that Bitcoin is sideways, right? If Bitcoin breaks 52.5, then let's see how strong ETH BTC is. Does ETH go to 6K? Right? I don't think so. Does ETH go to 4K? I don't think so. But it might go to 3,500 just based on a relative value basis. ETH has beat the pants off of SOL. The SOL ETH strength trade was clearly Q4 to about the end of January based on the cloud, below the yearly pivot. This will probably flip completely bearish on the cloud here pretty soon. And the pendulum is swinging to ETH. That's no question. We can look at total 3 relative to ETH, which is everything except Bitcoin and ETH relative to ETH. So it's kind of an ETH strength relative to other alts ratio, or ETH dominance, maybe you could call it. But this has clearly been in a channel for years. It's been noisy, but maybe the time to look for alt strength relative to ETH would be that all the way down here, right? So this could take another few months into the ETF stuff, even after that, where you're just better off. Like if you're an alt maxi, you're just better off in ETH, right? Broadly. Just something to consider, something to look at, something to think about and chew on, because I know that you know that there are a lot of bullish edge-to-edge trades on the cloud. For those who aren't familiar, this is a move through the entirety of the cloud from one edge to the other. Your stop losses here are always the red line, the Kijun, and or the cloud itself that it enters from. So you really never want to see price at the very bottom, like having this wishy-washy activity. We don't see really on any of these charts. To me, all these charts are very strong through the cloud, that are through the cloud, right? Waves not through the cloud, algo not through the cloud. Not all these will make it to the other side. Don't think you're pre-rich because you see Filecoin at 120, okay? It's probably not going to hit 120. Just keep that in mind. Waves probably not going to hit 30. I hate to break it to you. But I do think these have a good chance, because you are literally catching the bullish reversal following not only the entirety of the bearish trend, but a basing that's typically 1 to 2 years, allowing for buyers and sellers to come to an equilibrium, accumulation, all the good stuff you'd want to see for price to move higher. You've got good news catalysts that are extremely strong for price. Okay, Uni, as an example, was in the cloud for a little bit now. Interesting timing on the RevShare news, but that news tends to be more impactful when it's already on its way to turning the corner, right? Sushi picking up some of that, Comp picking up some of that relative to ETH ecosystem. Then you've got some other, layer 1 type stuff that's going to do maybe okay. But right now it's definitely an ETH show. As far as Solana on the daily, one other thing that I think will be actionable in the next 2 weeks probably. Ideally, we get ETH to 3,500, and then we get this touch back to 118 on SOL, and then the SOL relative value swings back into SOL's favor a little bit, right, to get SOL to 140, 150, just as a potential idea. So that's all the crypto stuff for the most part. Now we're running long. Let me just touch a few points on Coinbase here, which, look, I don't like the exchange. I don't like the company, but as a stock, it should continue to do well for the bulleted items here. If they get ETH ETF staking, it's just going to do even better. If they get ETH ETF custody, which they will, it's going to continue to do better. Technicals look great. It's above the daily cloud. It's in this pitchfork. I think it will have no problems getting back to 300 this cycle. It's just a matter of timing, a matter of duration. How long is that going to take? Okay. If we compare Coinbase, the business, to banks, which is crazy to say, but put with 100, 200, 193, 200 billion assets under custody, that puts them in rarefied air relative to US banks. And we know it's this high based on their earnings statement, based on what they tell us. And if we look at the quarterly growth, it's been quite strong. It's going to get stronger once we include the ETF custody in this for Q1. They also have Bitcoin on the balance sheet. I'm not sure if the FASB stuff is going to kick in next earnings. I don't think their VC book is marked at fair value yet. So there's a lot of ways this can go very right for Coinbase. Add on retail coming back. And they are almost too big to fail, which is scary to say for all the people who are worried about ETF custody. If we look at the top banks in the US, at 200 billion, you are cracking the top 20 easily. In a bull market, they could crack the top 10 easily. So their lobbying power, their regulatory power is significant from both sides, right? They have the ability to push, but they have this microscope on them because they're getting so big. And it's to the point where other regional banks, smaller banks, are saying, look, we want some of this sweet BTC ETF action, as Cointelegraph calls it. Thankfully for Coinbase, US regulators don't want banks custodying crypto yet. But if that happens, if the moat for Coinbase custody dissolves a little bit, that should probably hurt coin a little bit. So just keep that in mind, something to watch for coming down the pipe. A few last charts. Mara's got earnings this week on the 28th. This is a potential low time frame chart to watch. Riot and Hut earnings were quite awful. I don't have any opinion on what Mara should or shouldn't be. I have no idea. I'm just looking at the technicals here, and it's an idea to watch throughout the week. This little bubble in the top left is a reminder that Robinhood has 24-hour trading for a lot of this stuff. Not that you should trade it, but if you're looking for after-hours data or overnight data on prices, Robinhood has that data. So, I have an account at Robinhood. I don't have any money at Robinhood, but I just like to look at Coinbase and Marathon and whatever else every once in a while. Speaking of Hood, looks phenomenal. Again, same rationale. Multiple years of basing, making its way through the weekly cloud. At like 46, 50, whatever it is. Sure, right? If things get really cranking, why not? Square's another one in the weekly cloud. Finally, this is literally, 2 years at this point. So it looks like the tide is changing a little bit on that one. And then lastly, with Bitcoin, we don't have to be the fastest horse, right? We don't have to be NVIDIA. But as an asset class that's accessible, it really helps that we are faster than the S&P, that we're gaining on NASDAQ on a relative value basis. The last time we were this strong was post-halving 2020. And you can see how quickly, in a matter of months, arguably too fast, we gained on the S&P. And you better believe there are people, quants on Wall Street, looking at stuff like this now that the ETFs are available. Because if you're trying to beat your neighbor who's all in the S&P or in the NASDAQ, and you are not acknowledging, not allocating to Bitcoin, you are just losing money, okay? So it is to your advantage to do so based on your risk appetite, allocation, blah, blah, blah. If you made it this far, give me a like or dislike. Give me a comment. Let me know hello. If you're a lurker, first time, last time, every time watcher, let me know in the comments below. And happy trading.